In this lesson, you're going to become familiar with the terms that are related to the cells and to genetics. So let's start out with, what is a cell? Do you know what a cell is? Well, the cell is the very basic structure of the human body. It is a small microscopic unit that is fully functional on its own and serves as the basis for everything that is formed in the human body. So a cell is called the basic structural and functional unit of a living organism. That's the official definition. So how do we get from being a cell to being a whole human body if our body is basically made up of cells? Well, we have to organize them. So we take a bunch of cells and we put them together. And we take a bunch of cells and put them together to form a tissue. And that tissue does a common function. So we have a bunch of cells, we put them together to do one function, and we call them a tissue. If we take a bunch of tissues now and put them together to do a common function, they become an organ. So an organ is made up of a bunch of tissues that performs a common function. Now, if we take a bunch of organs and put them together to form a common function, we form an organ system. And if we take a bunch of organ systems and put them together, we then form an organism or a person. So let's look at this a little more detailed, in backwards fashion. You have a person, you. You are made up of organ systems. You have a cardiovascular system, an integumentary system, a digestive system. Okay, all those systems came together to form you as an organ. But if we then go and say, okay, well, we have organ systems. The organ systems are made up of organs. So, for example, if we take the cardiovascular system, organs in the cardiovascular system would be the heart, the blood vessels, the blood. Okay, well, we have a heart as an organ, but what forms that heart? Well, that heart is made up of a bunch of tissues. Okay, there are muscle tissues, there are nervous tissues in there that send impulses, there are protective tissues, there are lining tissues, there are liquid tissues, there are all kinds of tissues that come together to form that heart. So we have a tissue that's in the heart. We'll say we have the muscle tissue. So what makes up that muscle tissue? Well, a bunch of cells. And there are a bunch of muscle cells that come together that form the tissue. So that is how our body is organized and how the cell becomes a very basic piece or part of the human body. So some of the terms that we use with cells. Cyto. Cyto, cyte is cell, O is its combining form. Cyto itself means a cell. Ology is the study of. So if we put those together, we would have cytology, and cytology would be the study of the cells. Now, if we get an ologist, and we put cyto with ologist, a cytologist, we would have the person who studies the cells. Okay, let's see if you can fill in the blanks. cells form, tissues form, organs form, and systems form. Great. I have a video in Canvas called Genes, DNA, and Chromosomes. And if you have not already watched it, I would suggest stopping the lecture now, going and watching that video before we go to the next slides, because it really helps explain to you what genes and DNA are and chromosomes are. So go watch that and then come back in and finish up this lecture. Okay, so what are genes? Well, genes are that basic unit of heredity. Okay, if you would liken this to a recipe, it's all the individual things, the ingredients that you put in that are eventually going to make your cake. Okay, it's all the individual units. It's the code which makes up who we are. And what are chromosomes? Well, a chromosome are these thread-like structures that are located in the center of a cell. And they are made of molecules that contain the genes. Okay, so this is a picture of a chromosome, kind of thread-like chromosome, and it contains DNA molecules which contain the genes. Well, we said DNA. What's a DNA molecule? Well, DNA is long molecules that make up the chromosomes. They contain the instructions to make all the proteins in the body, like a recipe. So, I'm going to go back to that making a cake analogy to help you understand this. We're talking about the genes, okay? The genes in your making of a cake would be your individual ingredients. Your eggs, your butter, your sugar, your liquid. Say we're going to make chocolate cake, so we'd have some cocoa powder in there. And I like to use coffee in my chocolate cake because I think it gives it a nice depth instead of water. So those would be the individual genes. Now, when you're making up your recipe, you can't just dump all that stuff together. So you're going to take, for example, your liquids and put them together. So you're going to take your eggs and your coffee and blend them together, and sometimes your sugar and you're going to take your sugar and your butter and you're going to cream those, and then you're going to alternate and take them and put them all together to make the final product. So now that you've taken and combined the liquids and the butters and the creams and the flours and the baking sodas and the cocoa, you have 3 units that were formed from the smaller things, but they're a little bigger. So they'd be like your DNA molecules. Okay, they are bigger pieces formed by the genes. Okay, they are 3 new substances that were formed by the individual little ones. Then we're going to take all those and combine them together into the batter. Okay, when we put that all together in the batter, that would be like the chromosomes. So, a gene is here. It's this little small section that is the individual little units that make up your hereditary molecules, okay? Then we take a bunch of those genes and we put them together and we form this structure called DNA. And DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, if you really want to know what it is this structure that kind of looks like two woven threads maybe together. It's called a double helix, and it's a spiral structure. Now we take a bunch of these DNA molecules and put them together, and we form the chromosomes. All right. So these are all the things that help us pass along our hereditary inherited pieces from one organism to another. Again, it's like a recipe for making a human being. Now, things can go wrong with this process, and when it does, it's called a genetic disorder. A patho, disease or disorder, caused by the absence or a defective gene. One of those little tiny parts of the DNA molecule has a problem. It's either missing or it's defective. Something's wrong with it. So genetic disorders can sometimes be obvious at birth, and sometimes we don't see them right away. It's not until the body grows that they actually show up. So an example of this would be cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is a genetic disorder that is inherited, and it causes an issue with the pancreas and with the lungs. Hemophilia is a bleeding disorder that is, again, passed genetically. And phenylketonuria. I say fetal because we test newborn babies for it. Phenylketonuria, again, is a problem with processing phenylalanine in the body. The body cannot process it. It's missing some enzymes. More than you need to know, but all three of these disorders are genetic disorders. They are ones that are a problem with the genes and can be passed on from parents to children. So practice makes permanent. I highly suggest you go into Quizlet and do that review activity to help you make these terms related to cells and tissues and genetics permanent in your medical terminology vocabulary.